Hello and welcome back. I'm Michael Sandler, your host on Inspire Nation. If you've ever wanted to develop a beginner's mind and reinvent your life, then do we have the Wisdom at Work show for you. Today I'll be talking with Chip Conley, a New York Times bestselling author, hospitality entrepreneur, the founder of Joie de Vivre Hospitality, the strategic advisor for AirBNB, and the author of a sage and inspiring new book, Wisdom at Work. And that's what I want to talk with him about today, about the making of a modern elder and how we can reinvent ourselves at any age. That, plus we'll talk about Burning Man and Tues, Bing Crosby, gotcha, and David Bowie, Bill Campbell and Bert Jacobs, Shams and Rumi, the importance of Kumela, what it means to be in deep ship, Halloween babies, the importance of bear hugs, and what in the world throwing an air ball has to do with anything. So welcome to the show, Chip. Are you ready to shine?
I am shining from radiance within.
Woohoo! So, okay, before we dive right into things, what did you start back in 1987?
So in 1987, I was about 26 years old. I was a couple years out of Stanford Business School, and I was a real estate developer, but I was bored. I had a job, not a calling. And I decided that boutique hotels were just getting off the ground in the US. And I was going to take my very fledgling real estate background as a 26-year-old and apply it to boutique hotels. And so I created a company called Joie de Vivre, which means joy of life in French, but it's not a particularly practical name in the United States. Most people don't know how to pronounce it, spell it, or don't know what it means. And then I ran that company for 24 years as the CEO, creating 52 boutique hotels all in California.
How did you go from construction to, and I'll put it in quotes, hospitality?
You know, I do think hospitality is something you can learn, and you could go to the Cornell Hotel School, but in many ways, it's actually something you find within. Mm-hmm. You either have a hosting spirit or you don't. And I've always loved throwing parties.
Yep.
I've really enjoyed the idea of making people feel good. So part of it was just understanding how to apply that generosity of spirit that I had into a commercial venture. And so I was lucky enough that I hired a couple of really smart people with a hotel background who were able to be by my side.
Awesome. And then what was your generosity of spirit like by the time you turned 50?
Good question. I started Joie de Vivre for the joy of life and for the creativity and the freedom. Mm-hmm. By the time I was getting close to 50, I had lost some of that joie de vivre. It's an awful feeling to be running a company called Joie de Vivre and to be writing books about Abraham Maslow's hierarchy of needs and self-actualization, and then to feel like I don't like what I do every day anymore. And so I really did I had a flatline experience, which we'll probably talk about, that was a divine intervention that told me I needed to change things. And so by the age of 50, I had sold the company that I thought I'd be running till I was 80 years old.
Mm-hmm. So on that note, speaking of divine interventions, universe likes to turn up the volume very gently at first, a little bit more, and if we don't get it, then it takes a hammer or a 2x4.
Yes.
What was yours?
Well, what was interesting was when I was 12 years old, I told my parents I wanted to be a writer when I grew up. My parents said writers are either poor or psychotic, and most are both. I did not know what psychotic meant at age 12, but it didn't sound good. So I ran away from writing as a career. Then I became a business person, an entrepreneur, and lo and behold, I became a very successful entrepreneur, and I was giving speeches, and then a literary agent came up to me and she said, "You know what? You should be a writer." And I told her what my parents had said. She says, "No, don't worry about it." And so I wrote a book, and then another one and another one. By the time I'd written my third book and it became a bestseller, I was like, wow, I think this is what I really want to do. Mm-hmm. And then we went into the Great Recession in 2008. And I felt like I had to strap myself back into the CEO role of this company, Joie de Vivre. And one of my best friends committed suicide. His name was Chip, same name as mine. And everything that could go wrong was going wrong. And I broke my ankle playing baseball. I got a bacterial infection in that same leg. I was on a strong antibiotic, and I was in St. Louis giving a speech. And at the end of my speech, as I was signing books of my book, signing copies of my book, Peak, about self-actualization, I went unconscious first.
Yeah.
And then 5 minutes later, once the paramedic showed up, I went flatline and had this divine, and did it multiple times on the way to the hospital and then in the emergency room. Ultimately, they don't have an explanation of it other than I probably have an allergic reaction to that strong antibiotic. But I really did see it as divine intervention. I needed almost like something from the universe to tell me, yes, you can take off the invisible handcuffs of this identity you have created for yourself, this identity of being the founder and CEO of this big boutique hotel company. You can start over again. And it took me 2 years to do that because in the Great Recession, it was very hard to find anybody who wanted to buy my company, but it happened.
It's mind-blowing. And I'm thinking back of my life where I've reinvented myself and reinvented again. But that's the exception rather than the rule. To get out of the handcuffs of our costume and our identity, that's incredibly difficult, isn't it?
Yeah, we have an exercise that I'm starting to do with some people that we're working on who are like in transition in their lives in midlife. And the first thing we do is we have a bunch of name tags, and the name tags say things like, my identity at work, my business card defines my sense of worth, or as I get older, I feel like I'm more irrelevant, or a variety of different elements that are either identities or mindsets. And part of what we do during the week together is learn how to take off these name tags. These name tags that get affixed to us. Many times they're identities that in the identity could be father, it could be son, it could be, political activist, or in my case, it could be, founder and CEO of Joie de Vivre. And I wanted to take it off. And I ultimately did. The hard part, frankly, was the reaction of my friends and family who were so used to seeing that identity, they didn't know what to do with me if I wasn't that identity. But they ultimately got used to it.
Woohoo!
Yay.
And then a new identity started chasing you down. Who is Brian Chesky, and what happened when he reached out to you?
So yeah, I had a couple of years in between when I sold my company and Brian approached me, and during that time it was fun. I wrote a book called Emotional Equations, and like literally sort of almost digesting the emotions I had of going to the other side and what does it mean to understand being dead. And
let me pause you for a second.
Yeah.
Is there a story there that I need to ask about?
Well, I think, the thing that was interesting for me, and recently I was just sitting with a friend, a new friend who had a flatline experience, and he was flatlined for 4 minutes, and I was never more than 15 seconds. And we all have our stories about what do you see on the other side. And usually there's light involved. In my case, it was like I was in the Aspen, Rocky Mountains in a beautiful chalet with sun coming through a skylight, lighting up a beautiful living room with just a stunningly beautiful wooden floor, sort of darker wooden floor. And there's a frangipani tropically scented smell everywhere. And then there was this really heavy oil, see-through viscous oil that was just slowly seeping down these most beautiful stairs you've ever seen. And so all I could see as I was in my state of being on the other side with no heartbeat was the color of the light on the walls, the prisms of almost kaleidoscope rainbow colors from light coming through the skylight onto this oil that smelled beautifully and then reflected on the walls. And then I would come back and I'd be alive again. And I'd say to whomever was next to me, here's what I saw this time. And the thing that was amazing is every time I came back, I didn't remember I had been out before. So I'm like, I'm just completely disoriented. And I would say, this is what I just saw. And it was the same thing each time. So I don't know. Maybe I'm supposed to live in the mountains with you.
Come on down.
Yeah.
So, and I won't go into my story, but the the thing that strikes me the most is how brilliant the light was that I saw. And I was actually the second time in Lake Tahoe, surrounded by trees as
Ah,
that experience was taking place.
wow, 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 wow. Was it a skiing accident? What happened?
No, it was a bizarre hiking accident where
Hmm.
I was hiking in leather moccasins and did a little creek crossing, and maybe some water and some sand had gotten on the bottom of a moccasin. I had stepped up on this pyramid shaped rock. The next thing you know, my legs are flown out from underneath me, and I land on another pyramid shaped rock right below my hip, which blew
Hmm.
apart my right leg, and shards of bone were going into my femoral artery,
Oh, wow.
and I stopped breathing there.
Hoy vey.
So it doesn't
More,
it
more, tell more.
well, I stopped breathing, and everything started to black out on me. I managed to get out a cry to my wife, who was out in front of me. And then I was basically given a choice. I didn't hear a booming voice. There was just a knowing that I had a choice, which is go toward light or go back to my wife.
Mm.
And we had just been talking about having kids,
Mm.
which is funny. Where it's a few years ago, and we're in baby planning mode now, and I'm like, I'm not ready. I'm not ready to go yet, and I had to. Um, sorry, I go back there.
No, go, go.
I had for the next, I don't remember now. I think it was about an hour. I had to manually breathe each breath because if I stopped breathing, I would go black and go away.
Yeah.
And so it was, my waist down was stuck in a freezing cold creek, probably from a physical point of view, what saved my life. I had to manually breathe. The light above me just kept getting brighter and brighter, whether it was a Lake Tahoe sun or this brilliance. And all I was doing was I was in a meditation in between. The body would spasm and would kind of move on its own and rack in pain, and I would scream. But in between that, I was breathing in light and sending out love, and breathing in light and sending out love. And when the emergency workers finally got to me, they couldn't get a blood pressure on me, but I was still alive. I was still there, and most profound experience, such a sense of, well, once they got there, of peace, but such knowings, or I don't have words for it, downloads, understandings. When you talk about this book here, to draw it forward to a book on elders, and I had this twice, I've had two NDEs, to me, they're accelerators. And so you may be in a young body. You're what,
Yeah.
57, 58 now?
50, yeah, 58 next month. Yep.
See, I consider that a young body, and
Yep.
yet you have this wisdom about you that probably far exceeds your years
Yeah.
based on
Well,
such experiences.
there's no doubt when you're faced with death, as much as the two of us have been in our own lives, and this may be also true when in people who are tending to those that are dying in a hospice. But when it's on a personal level, it does accelerate your sense of what's important in life, as well as living moment in that moment, that immediacy of being in the moment. And I think Dr. Laura Carstensen at Stanford Center for Longevity has shown that when people actually feel like they have fewer years left to live, they actually get happier. And it's not because they want to end their life. It's because they actually get less focused on the way out there in the future
Yeah.
that isn't really that important. And so that sense of immediacy is particularly important. And it's why that U curve of happiness that's gotten a lot of attention lately is interesting. People's worst decade of their life is unfortunately the decade you're in right now, Michael, but you're coming out of it pretty well, which is your 40s. And after that, your 50s are happier than your 40s, your 60s are happier than their 50s, and amazingly, your 70s are happier than your 60s, 50s, or 40s. So one of the things that I really wanted to emphasize in the book Wisdom at Work is that just because you're going into midlife doesn't mean that it's the start of your long, slow decline toward death. Yes, our physical peak is our 20s, and our financial and salary peak is probably age 50. But our emotional peak as humans, in which we understand our humanity because we have developed pattern recognition about ourselves and others, is in our 50s, 60s, and 70s. And that's a really important thing to know, because if you think that you're going into this midlife period, which is almost like the caterpillar going into the the caterpillar going into the cocoon or the chrysalis, and you think on the other side of that chrysalis is not a butterfly, but is instead a piece of excuse me, but if that's what you think, then you're going to actually want to stay in that awful midlife period, which has also been known as the midlife crisis period, for a long time, because on the other side of it is just a worse world, which is full of decrepitude.
And I don't want to go too much into it, but Jessica, my wife's the producer, she was having a phone call with her mom who's in her 70s recently, who was talking about you have to prepare at this age because it's all downhill from here. And what you're saying is, well, first off, it takes a reframing, doesn't it?
It does. It does. It depends on what's downhill. I mean, yes, physically, it starts downhill, and physically, frankly, for a lot of people, after their 20s. I'm in good shape. I learned how to surf last year at age 56. But I mean, the truth is that, when I eat a chocolate chip cookie, it definitely sticks to my waist more than it did 20 years ago. And I'm still as active physically as I used to be. So it's just, things do change there. And yeah, and in some ways in the workplace, after a certain age, you sometimes feel like, you're not as well regarded or, well loved. But the truth is that what's fascinating about applying this to the workplace for a moment is power is cascading to the young faster than ever before. And we have these young people like starting companies, and we sort of should match them with these wise modern elders who are not about just like dispensing wisdom. A modern elder is as much an intern or a learner as they are a teacher or a mentor.
So how was it? And then I want to dive into what drove me nuts about your book.
Yes.
First off, who is Brian then? What happened when you got together with him?
Thank you. Back to that question. So Brian is the co-founder and CEO of AirBNB. And so now let's speed forward to age 52. A couple of years after I sold the company, I was approached by Brian to help him democratize hospitality, because at that point, AirBNB was a small, fast-growing tech startup, but had nobody in the company with any hospitality or hotel or travel background. It sounded good, but I had no idea what AirBNB was. I mean, I'd been the pioneer at age 26 when I started my boutique hotel company, but now I'm the establishment at age 52 and don't know, like, what are they talking about? People staying in each other's homes? Why would they want to stay in someone else's home when you can stay in a hotel? Yeah, it was just a weird thing, but I realized, okay, let me listen to him. And I loved his courageous perspective on what they were doing. And it was clear that they tapped into something. So long story short is Brian asked if I could be his in-house mentor and help them create a hospitality company. And I was going to do it initially part-time, but within about 3 or 4 weeks, it was absolutely full-time. And so I became the head of global hospitality and strategy for AirBNB in early 2013, when we had at that point, we had about 4 million customers. So it was a big company, but we now have 300 million customers 5.5 years later. So it's grown, it's like 1% of the size of what it is today. And what I learned in that process was I thought I was supposed to be Brian's mentor, but on my third day on the job, I was in a room full of engineers, and one of the engineers turned to me, the guy running the meeting, the 25-year-old wizard leading the meeting, turned to me and said, "If you shipped a feature and no one used it, did it really ship?" And I'm like, I have no idea. Chip, me, I am in deep. I have no idea what you're talking about. And then I felt like, oh shit, I am not just the mentor here. I am also the intern. And that was my introduction to realizing, wow, I could either run for the hills at that point, or I could cast judgment on these young geniuses, or I could turn that judgment into curiosity and look at if I could, match my wise eyes with their fresh eyes.
Makes sense. And so you went from 15 hours a week to 16 hours a week, from the mentor to the student to the mentern.
Well, so I went from you said 15 hours a week to 16 hours a week.
No, this is 60.
Oh, 60, yes. 60 hours a week or 16 hours a day sometimes. Yes. I became a mentern, which is like a mentor and an intern combined. And it was a beautiful experience, because when you're in midlife, if you start to calcify a little bit and you just sort of get used to just doing the same old damn thing every day, you are on your path to preparing to leave this earth. And the process of me becoming just this beginner's mind, catalytically curious person who accepted that I was going to intern publicly and mentor privately, which basically meant I asked a lot of questions in meetings. But when I saw someone flailing in a meeting, running a meeting, who was half my age, I didn't act like their parent in the meeting and say, "Hey, here's how you can turn it around." I'd ask them later after a meeting, do you want some advice about how that could have been done differently? And that way I was able to help people without actually feeling like I was a parent.
I love it. So here's briefly, I was going to tell you off air, but since we're on air and it's more fun, what's driven me nuts about this book.
Yes.
So, we have a show that's in every country worldwide. It is a rocket ship. I'm exceptionally happy with what we've done to be able to reach people, elevate consciousness, raise the vibration of the planet. This is our mission. This is our goal. And yet, I admit, social media, all of these things, even though I'm broadcasting to the world, I don't know what I'm doing. And so I saw your book, in a sense, as a bridge, both of, I've been saying, I want a mentor, I want a coach, and it sounds like I also need a youngster. I need somebody half my age to understand a lot of this.
You know what? Here's the part I would say, Michael, is you might need someone half your age or someone twice your age. I mean, twice your age would be maybe a little too old, but maybe 50% older than you. Mm-hmm. So that means you could have someone who's 24 or 72.
I love it.
And that, it would be interesting. I was actually giving a speech yesterday, and there was a fascinating audience. The audience almost sort of took it into a workshop format. And I was just giving a speech and doing Q&A, and next thing I knew, it was like, they had created little small groups, and they were having conversations. There was one group that had a 72-year-old, a 50-year-old, a 25-year-old, and then a few other people. And those three people, honestly, by the end of their 20-minute session together, they had actually started to build a business together. I'm not kidding you. Wow. And so I think the future is about learning how to create an intergenerational collaboration. We have this tendency to almost operate like separate isolationist countries on the same continent, these generations of ours. It's almost like we share a border, but we don't necessarily trust each other enough to share the dialect or the wisdom or what we have to offer. In my case, I'm an older person in AirBNB full of younger people. I had a lot of emotional intelligence, because that's something you build up over the course of your decades on the planet through pattern recognition. And yet they had a lot of digital intelligence, or DQ. So we did basically a trade agreement. I got their DQ, digital intelligence. They got my EQ, emotional intelligence, and we were both better off for it.
I love it. So you say, when in doubt, find a role model.
Yes. Well, I think that's true. And I also like to call leaders role models instead of leaders. I certainly don't love the word manager. And, managing sounds like we're just sort of like, figuring out how to, I don't know. It's like, it feels very transactional. A leader is a step above that. But a role model, when you actually think of yourself as a role model, it absolutely changes your behavior, because you realize the way you are showing up is the way other people are going to show up. And I think so few leaders, especially in the workplace, keep that in mind. And so for me, what I needed was a role model when I became this both mentor and intern at the same time in a tech world I didn't understand. And that's when I found this guy, Bill Campbell, who had passed away at that point. But I read enough about him and I talked to enough people about him that he really became, my role model, even though he was no longer living, which is a great sense of like legacy is something, Eric Erickson, the developmental psychologist, said, I am what survives me. Mm-hmm. And that's speaking to legacy. And so Bill Campbell, what survives Bill Campbell is his reputation. And here I am using a dead man's reputation to be better at what I do today.
So from I guess you've got this line in your head, and how has it guided you? What would Bill do?
So what would Bill do was the question that came in my head when I was like, oh my God, I don't know what I'm going to do here. So for example, Brian and I would have Brian Chesky, CEO, really busy guy, wants to meet with me, but we'd have like half-hour meetings a couple times a week. And one out of the two of them, he'd have to cancel because he'd have other meetings going long. The other one was like, ended up being a 20-minute meeting. So I just said, what did Bill Campbell do with Steve Jobs? Because Bill Campbell was Steve Jobs' mentor. And Bill Campbell said, listen, we do our meetings that are substantive on weekends. So I had a cottage in my backyard, and Brian and I started having Saturday and Sunday morning meetings. Whenever we were both in town, we would have meetings in my cottage, and they might last 3 or 4 hours. But there were no distractions. So, I mean, that's a simple example of what would Bill do. Another big example was like sometimes in a meeting, I was hearing things. I did my best to just try to listen. Here's an interesting thing. You live up in the woods.
Yeah.
I was in Utah in the woods recently doing a summit series talk, and I was going to be giving a talk on wisdom and to people half my age. And I'm walking in, and there's an owl on this guy's arm, and
I love it.
An eagle owl. So I asked the guy. I said, "So why is the owl perceived as the wise animal or bird?" And he said, "The owl has the best listening instincts of any animal in the forest. So knowledge speaks, wisdom listens. So just know that wisdom is about listening." And so I was listening really well in this meeting, but at some point I just had to speak up and say, you know what? Bill Campbell's not in this room right now, but here's what Bill Campbell would say if he was hearing all this. And I actually just said a really unvarnished truth that needed to be said. And people leaned into me because I'm not necessarily someone who just spouts off. I usually ask a lot of questions. But in this case, it was like, I have a point of view here and I need to say it. And it was so interesting because the moment I said it, one of the co-founders stood up and just said, "Thank God someone finally spoke the truth." And that's another element of being a modern elder, is there's an element of, it's not about being a cranky old man or woman, but it is the element of unvarnished truth. And the unvarnished truth better be a combination of confidence and doubt. I think wisdom is really good judgment based upon pattern recognition with the perfect alchemy of confidence and doubt, which means that you're not the old cranky man who just proclaims this is the way it is. No, you actually articulate why, having listened to all of this, you believe that there's a truth that needs to be spoken and put on the table.
Can you tell us what that truth was you spoke that day?
Oh, it's a confidential issue because it actually has a lot to do with whether AirBNB should actually become a public company or not. Mm-hmm. So, and it's a private company still. So I can't say exactly what it is, but I love the fact you asked. You're good, Michael. You are good.
Working on the owl skills here. Working on the owl skills.
Well, but I would say here's where it actually became really interesting and very consistent. Brian was the person in the company that Brian appreciated me as the person in the company he most wanted to interview people. Mm-hmm. Because he said, "Chip, your listening skills, you are not just listening to the story, you're listening for the story." And the difference between that is listening for the story is trying to piece together the thread or theme of what is this person made up of. Like, what is it? Like, people tend to go into a job interview and they're very scripted. So I tended to ask some questions that would throw people off their game. Nothing, salacious. But like one of the questions I would love to ask is, tell me the number one way you're misperceived in the workplace. Now let's take a step back. Yeah. Wow. Okay. I'm misperceived in the workplace. That means I am misperceived. You're sort of saying I am. So some people would actually come back to me straight on, like, I'm not misperceived. And I said, okay, everybody sees you exactly as how you are. Yes, I'm transparent in every way. And so the way you show up at work is just the way you show up at home. Yes, yes. And so we get to a place where I realize, oh my God, this person is so reactive to this question. Let's peel it back further. But that's not the normal reaction. The normal reaction is someone gets really lost in the question. How am I misperceived? And what's most apparent is when someone doesn't have the self-awareness to know, I'll take them through the process because they say, I don't know. And I say, okay, so let's look at 5 adjectives that define how you see yourself. And now let's look at 5 of how other people see you. Are they the same 5? No. What's the difference? Okay. And then we get into the theme, like oh, wow, people see me as just an easygoing person, but frankly, I'm a really competitive, totally like driven type A person, but I come across this other way. Okay, let's unpack that a little bit. And by 10 minutes into it, they realize Chip has become their psychologist. But the reason that's valuable, and the reason this unvarnished truth about that's valuable, is because I want to really unpack that kind of psychological understanding of someone before I hire them. Because guess what? After I've hired them, I will figure all that out. And usually it's too late at that point.
So I love that. And that poor person is sweating bullets for a few minutes until they realize you're on their side and they're actually going to gain something out of it.
Oh, truly. And I that's really what I don't usually ask that question first, and it's about 4 or 5 questions in when they can tell that Chip's a great, nice person. But yeah, Chip is willing to ask the questions or reveal himself in ways that is not normal in the workplace. And I don't mean like reveal myself, taking clothes off or anything like that. I mean reveal myself in terms of being authentic. I think the best leaders out there are vulnerable visionaries, and it means that they're able to have the vulnerability to allow everybody to show up as who they are in the workplace, while also being confident and visionary enough to help lead people to the promised land. So, yeah.
I love that balance, and questions is a perfect place that comes out. That balance between vulnerability and confidence, because questions are one of the most important things, and being willing to put yourself out there and say, I don't know.
Yeah. The I don't know, those 3 words are like 3 of the most valuable words a senior leader can give, especially a CEO or founder. When you can give the liberty for the people you work with to be able to say, I don't know, and hopefully, but let me try to find out. That's the full sentence. The I don't know is really sort of before the comma, because the I don't know is helping people to sort of be honest about what they don't know. Anybody who thinks they know it all clearly doesn't know it all,
and is dangerous in a sense.
Yeah, and we won't even get into what what are the risks of that, but yes. Yeah, I mean, the one thing I learned when I wrote the book Emotional Equations is that leaders are the emotional thermostats of those they lead. They're not they're not the thermometer. They actually set the climate control in the room, in the company, in the culture, in the country, in the case of you're the president. And you have an enormous, you don't just have the bully pulpit, but you literally have the climate control. And that is fundamental to the idea of a leader or a role model. When you realize you are that much of a role model, you hope that it actually ups your game.
Well, I had for many years a mentor who was he was my best man at 89 years young. His name was Jack.
Oh, wow.
And he passed away half a year. He said that men pass away about half a year after they retire. And so he retired from driving the nursing home bus, driving the quote youngsters at 93 years young.
Wow.
And half a year later, he said, it's time, I'm checking out of here. And he really challenged Jessica and I not only to get on our A game, to trim and trim and trim our lives some more. What do you mean an elder is an editor?
Michael, I love you. I just want to tell you, you know my book well, and you've got great stories too. So,
and thank you. I send all the love right back your way, Chip.
Thank you so much. Well, we spend the first half of our life accumulating. And what do I mean by that? Accumulating knowledge, accumulating friendships, relationships, maybe children at some point, accumulating roles and responsibilities, accumulating identities, accumulating stuff. That's our first half of our life. And then there's a point at which, and it depends on, it has somewhat to do with the U curve of happiness. It's usually around the time where you sort of shift into this new era and you start getting happier, is you start realizing it's time to edit. Because accumulating all of that means that you are carrying a hell of a load. And being able to start saying, of all the stuff I'm carrying, and some of the carrying is points of view, perspective. And frankly, at times it's like just junk. You've just accumulated junk. And then the process of distilling down from what you have to what's important is what we do in the second half of our life. And I think that process is such a liberation. And you see it literally sometimes with the empty nester parents in their 50s or 60s who decide to sell the 4-bedroom home and go live in a 2-bedroom, they're in the suburbs and they decide to go live in the city with a 2-bedroom condo. And that process is sometimes a process of just helping to shed what is weighing you down. So how is this relevant in the workplace? Well, it's extremely relevant in the sense that if knowledge is an additive thing, an additive equation, wisdom is a division equation. It's actually distilling down. And so one of the things I learned at AirBNB is we had a lot of people full of knowledge in that company, technical geniuses. But when I joined, we had 30 different strategic initiatives. Nobody could actually recite all of them, including Brian. So I was in charge of the first strategy offsite of our team of the leaders, and we went to New York and we pared it down to 4. We said these are the 4 things that we're going to focus on the next year. So that process of distilling down to what's important and editing is very important for any company to be clear. What does it take to focus? Steve Jobs, one of the most famous things he said was about the fact that his best skill and most important skill as a leader was what to say no to. And the reality is when you say no to something, you're saying a more enthusiastic yes to those things that you have said yes to. And it's only through trial and error do you figure that out, because quite frankly, many young entrepreneurs just burn the candle so long that they don't realize that they could have made it a lot easier for themselves and their team, and frankly for the prospects of their business, if they had actually focused on what was the core business long enough to get it successful. And that's really, I think, one of the things I did well at AirBNB is to help them see the core business here can be very successful. We can even get it profitable. AirBNB is a private company and profitable, unlike a lot of the other sharing economy companies. It's an extremely profitable company, not extremely. It's a moderately profitable company as a private company, and that has to do with keeping our focus.
It's fascinating. As soon as we get done with this call, I have a call with my sports coach. So I used to be a professional cyclist. I was also a speed skater. And this past year, for some reason, I got back into skating and then came into this valley here by Aspen, and everybody was bike racing around me, and found myself racing bicycles again after 15 plus years of retirement, going, what am I doing? And from an ageism point of view, I must say some of the fastest riders here are 50 to 65.
Yeah.
Because they pare back on their lives. They actually have more time to focus on what's important, and they get outrageously fit.
There's that, and there's also, it's interesting, there's a beautiful article in Outside Magazine about peak performance and when is it. And they actually show there's a physical peak, which is earlier, but there's a wisdom peak about
Bingo.
Understanding your body. And once you understand your like how your body works, you can see some of the marathon runners who are a little bit older. They know exactly how to tap into their energy when they need to tap into their energy, because they have the pattern recognition of having done it long enough.
Yeah, you have Meb, who won the Boston Marathon a few years ago as considered an elder in the marathon, but he knew his body. So I'm meeting with my coach in, less than an hour. The discussion is exactly this, which is I've been running, I've been skating, I've been riding, I've been doing all these other activities, which I love. We need to pare down and focus now. And it's interesting. He's a national team coach for skating. And I'm going to be saying to him, I need to skate less so that I can bring my focus to what matters most.
Beautiful. I'm very, very envious of you. That's great.
So it's exciting. I am at this point, I am following the passion in life and saying, where does it guide me? What's most exciting? What's most interesting? Without attachment, without a desire to, I'm actually not competitive. I mean, I compete, I'm in the race, but it's a desire. I see a race as an organization, as a cohesive unit from first to last is all one group going along. I may want to move more to the front of that group, but it's not about beating anybody now. It's from a different, very different perspective.
Yeah. Beautiful. Beautiful. Listen, when you get into the flow, you're talking about flow there.
Yes.
And Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi, who sort of popularized the idea of flow, is a friend, and he invited me up for 4 days to Montana to his summer home with his wife. And I got to spend 4 days with a guy talking about flow and how to get in flow states. And being in a flow state, whether it's in physical athletics or whether it's in your just an artistic endeavor or it's even in business, it's such a beautiful experience because the level of success you have when you're in the flow state is usually going to be much better than when you're in the competitive state. And the competitive state is literally sort of driving. And it actually creates some stress that actually holds you back. I know it, having given a speech last night at the TED headquarters, I was so driven to get every word right that at some point I realized I am out of flow here. I need to just sort of go back to just like, okay, what gives me the right frame for me to feel the flow of having this speech come through me, as opposed to me just forcing the speech on the audience.
How did you make that switch? Because in that moment, you've got all eyes, or if you can't see the eyes, all lights on you.
So obviously breathing helps, and I do meditate, and I've been meditating for 35 years. And the combination of meditating, creative visualization, such that I actually visualize myself up on stage before I'm up there, and I'm breathing, sort of imagining what it's like to be on stage. And then when I actually get on stage, how do my feet feel on the ground? That's the first thing I do. How are my feet feeling on the ground? And how do I take 3 just nice sized breaths before I say my first words? And I usually then say, okay, let's memorize my first sentence. The only thing I really have to memorize is that first sentence, because there's a risk that I'll have my feet on the ground and I'll be breathing, and I was like, I'll just close my eyes and I'll meditate in front of all you people. But I need the flow does sometimes need a little bit of a push. And then once I go there, then it just, and it's not saying that I don't spend a lot of time rehearsing and thinking about it, but my best speech is no doubt, and this is why I don't enjoy the TED format quite as much, because they really do force you to, stay on script. And they want you to be right on time. There's the TED time. It used to be 18 minutes. Now it's 10 to 12 minutes. Like, you can't go longer than that. But I am more of an extemporaneous speaker. I just, like, when I'm in the flow, something's coming through me. There's a beautiful TED talk by Liz Gilbert in 2009 when she talked about genius is not really about someone who's like that. Leonardo da Vinci is the genius. No, Leonardo da Vinci is a genius because he knows how to tap into the genie. And the genie is out there in the world, some kind of cosmic consciousness, and you become the receptacle, the channel for being able to allow that genie to come through you. And I do believe that is true. And I think that those who are inspired are in the state of inspiration. They are in an in-spirit state, and that spirit is coming through you in that moment. And my best speeches have absolutely been when I was in that state of being a channel.
So did you have fun last night?
It was good. It was not bad. The best part was actually, at one point I did look at the audience, and I was the first speaker. And so it was a little bit, people weren't warmed up.
That's hard.
Yeah, they weren't warmed up yet. And the good news is I had a funny line early on, and people got it, and they were clearly on my side. But maybe a quarter of the way through it, I froze. I forgot the next section of my talk, and I looked at Deborah, my friend who's in the audience, and she's mouthing it to me, and I got, oh yeah, that's it. And then I said, like, to the audience, like, thank God for editors. And it's true, because Ted does edit really, very tightly in terms of, so in a normal speech, though, I wouldn't have that problem, because in a normal speech, I wouldn't be trying to stay on the script that I'm supposed to stay on. I would just sort of say, okay, what's going to come through me now? And fortunately, it usually has some linearity to it.
Very cool. So we'll go from what's going to come through me now. Let's talk about, we've gone from flow. Let's go from flow to fear to curiosity.
Yeah. Well, fear and curiosity are sort of opposites, and fear tends to force and focus your attention in such a way that often in a fight or flight or freeze kind of way. It's very primal. Curiosity is quite the opposite. Curiosity sort of is an opening up. Curiosity, and I really do believe it's the core skill of a modern elder, is the ability to sort of open up to possibility and open up to the idea that something may not be obvious or apparent yet, and you're curious about what that might be. Whereas fear is often a grabbing. It's like, okay, it's sort of like, it's like I'm going to drown in the water, so I need a life preserver. Give it to me now. There's an urgency to it. Curiosity is not an efficient mindset necessarily. It's a mindset that actually, in fact, instead of trying to make things finite, it's actually trying to make things a little bit more infinite in terms of your choices. And that's not. It's why some people, like the military, is not particularly a place where they want curious people in their platoon, because it's about efficiency, and it's about a little bit of hierarchy. But the beautiful thing about curiosity is it's the core of what creates creativity and innovation. It's the core of what creates resiliency. It's the core of so much, and yet it doesn't get nearly the attention that, say, creativity and innovation do.
It's fascinating, because when you're talking about curiosity, so many things are coming to mind here. You mentioned the word mindset. That brings up Carol Dweck, and it also brings up to me a beginner's mind. And maybe the more wisdom we have, the more we're actually willing to step back and allow a beginner's mind to come in.
Yeah, I think the idea, when you get to a place where you've created the space for magic to emerge, and that magic is a bit of a dance between what is fate and sort of coming to you in a channeled kind of way, and what you have in your repertoire of skills. That kind of dance, that combination of almost fate / destiny and your own personal mastery, having the mastery and the destiny meet on the dance floor. Oh wow, that's a title of some future book. Yeah. But that's interesting. Mastery and destiny coming together for a dance, and I actually think that's a very lyrical way to imagine what it means to live your calling.
And that requires, for mastery and destiny to come together, to me, the word that comes in there is you need to be open or allowing for it.
Allowing, yeah. It's I've spent my life being an attainer. I attain things, which is not a great place to be sometimes. And I've learned that the quality that I like to have in my life more than attainment today is attunement. Ooh. So I've spent my life being an attainer, and then I end up having to atone. Good word on Yom Kippur week. And yet when I'm in the attunement mode, I'm at one. So attain leads to atone, attune leads to at one. Therefore, and frankly, as a relatively new surfer, you do not attain surfing, just like you do not attain yoga. You attune in yoga, you attune in surfing, and there's many things in life. You attune in making love, well, maybe most of the time, hopefully,
Hopefully.
um, you attune, and some other things. And yes, there's some times in life where attainment is a proper approach. For me, I learned as a firstborn type A person, it's about attainment, until I started realizing, like, how many parts of my life does attunement show up, and I love it. When I write poetry, yes, I'm not attaining my poetry, I'm attuning.
I love it. And when I coach somebody, what I tell them is, I don't want you to work harder. I don't want you to work smarter. I want you to learn how to get in the flow. That is attunement.
Yeah. And but it was not something we've taught. I mean, know what? Like, I don't even think a lot of people even know what the word means. It's like, oh, is that what you do to your piano? I'm gonna attune my piano. I don't. Yeah. Well, I mean, yes, you can tune your piano, but or a tuning fork. People understand there's a tune out there, but the idea of to attune, which is really a form of finding harmony. Attunement is a form of finding harmony. And maybe part of the reason it isn't in the lexicon all that much is because it's a feminine word in many ways, and attaining is a masculine word, and we've lived in a relatively masculine U.S. culture, and so it's time for us to attune to our femininity. You and me, Michael.
Woohoo! So let's see if I can bring this all together. Attunement, atonement, finding harmony. And actually, since we're talking about atonement, we're talking about Yom Kippur. Since we're talking about Yom Kippur, we're talking about Kol Nidra. Since we're talking about Kol Nidra, we can talk about Khalil Gibran. And work is love made visible.
It is. And that is the thing I said on stage on virtually my last day at AirBNB with 3,000 AirBNB employees there. I got up and I had a speech that I was supposed to give. And I got up there on stage. They gave me a standing ovation, like all these youngsters like saying, "We love you, Chip." They're shouting out at me, and I'm going on stage. I feel like a rock star, and I felt my feet on the floor. I felt my breathing, and then instead of the first sentence that I was supposed to give, I just said, Khalil Gibran wrote in the Prophet, work is love made visible, and you're showing that to me right now. And I just started crying a little bit on stage, and then I gave my 15-minute farewell speech to 3,000 employees, which was, my God, that was my commencement speech. My commencement for my own graduation. So yeah, that's in the last chapter of my book, and I hope you all read my book, Wisdom at Work, The Making of a Modern Elder.
Where can people go to find your book and to find out more?
ChipConley.com is probably the best place for them to go, and Conley spelled Conley. And you'll see information about me. You'll see information about the book, as well as my other books, my 4 other books, as well as you'll see information about the Modern Elder Academy, which is where we help people to learn how to become modern elders.
Fantastic. So you said chipconley.com, is that correct?
Yep. Yes.
So if you didn't catch chipconley.com, come on over to inspirenationshow.com. We'll get you over to chipconley.com. Since we're talking about making a modern elder, what one homework assignment would you give people today, Chip, so they can take action in becoming a modern elder?
Number 1 is go find something to become curious about. Find something that it doesn't have to have anything to do with your work. But what is something that's fascinating to you? For me, it was hot springs, and then it was, festivals, and then it was emotions. What is it that is something that you could go learn and become the world's leading expert at?
Awesome. So on that note, Jessica always wants me to ask a question for parents and their kids. What advice would you give parents, wisdom advice for their kids today?
Well, same curiosity. I mean, the good news is kids are curious, but the idea of helping your kids realize that a growth mindset, back to Carol Dweck, is the idea of trying to improve myself is, in the long run, a lot healthier and happier than a fixed mindset, which is more like I'm trying to prove myself. A fixed mindset is proving yourself. A growth mindset is I'm improving myself. And kids need to understand that it's okay to fail.
Which is huge, and in today's educational system, not something they're regularly taught.
No.
On that note, switching gears, what personally brings you the greatest happiness, or what I call the woohoo factor?
You know what? I have a couple sons. I have a 6 and a 3-year-old, and when I see them in their just loving flow state, it gives me a huge woohoo.
Did I hear correctly? 6 and 3?
Yeah.
All right, we're on the same path, same trajectory, and age scope together.
Oh, wow.
They're keeping you young, aren't they? And on your toes.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, there's a zen about parenting. There's a zen about children that forces you out of all of that monkey mind to actually focus on them. And there's times when that's really incredibly frustrating because you have other things to do. But you get used to it.
Beautiful. Any last, this has been phenomenal, Chip, and I definitely want to keep in touch. This is,
please.
I love this heart connection here.
Thank you.
Any last words of wisdom you want to share with people today?
No, I think that the number one thing I would just say is this. I'm 57 years old, soon to be 58. I did one of those online longevity things recently that said, okay, how long am I going to live to? And it said I was going to live till age 98. If you do the math, and you start at age 18, because that's when we became an adult and we had really full control of our lives. I have had 39 years of adulthood. But if I'm going to live till 98 and I'm 57, I have 41 years ahead of me. I am not even at halftime of my adult life. And when I think that way, it helps me to imagine, wow, what are the new things I could do in my 60s or my 70s?
I love it. I love to say that we grossly overestimate what we can do in a day and radically underestimate what we can do in a year or a few years. Can you imagine what you can do in the next 41 years?
Beautiful. Love that.
So for everyone out there, this is Michael Sandler saying, be well, have fun, get wisdom at work, and begin reinventing yourself today and shine bright. Woohoo! You hit that out of the park, Chip.
Really? Oh my God, I'm so tired. I can't believe I did it. Thank you. Well, you set me up for it very well. You threw some nice softballs at me, so that's why I was able to hit it out of the park. So,
then my job is done. Thanks so much for watching. If you enjoyed it, be sure to like below. Also, leave your comments. Have some real fun with it. Subscribe to our channel where you're going to get more great videos, more interviews coming up. And check out our website, inspirenationshow.com. That's where you'll find tips, blogs, information, videos you won't find anywhere else, and useful and helpful resources to really help you kickstart your life and to shine bright. Thanks so much again. Thank you for your support. Like, comment, subscribe. See the website. Thanks so much and have fun. Of course, shine bright. Woohoo!